the children were generally in the sit down and shut up stage when they got home. Father, if he had a steady job, would somehow manage to find money for a couple of drinks, which would get him out of the house in the evening so he wouldn't feel guilty looking at his wife and his children. The mother there were got old before their time, very old before their time, because of the worry of the feeding and the rent and all the rest came more from the mother than from the father. It may sound a little bit odd, but I always felt a little sorry for the teachers in the schools, because they were trying to teach children who didn't have anything to aspire to. Someone would say, one of the smart kids would say, it's no use learning to read or write, because when you leave school, you won't find a use for them. You'll have no job, period. And the teachers had, I think, perhaps the same uphill job that they would had in the like of Harlem. During the 1920s or 1930s, there were the rebellion of the children, the attitude they had towards the teacher was brought mainly from home. Not much hope at home, and that attitude was brought into the schoolrooms. So the teachers were not a cheerful bunch either. Discipline was the biggest problem because of the attitude that the kids had. And more than once I've seen the teacher threatened by the pupils. Some of them has told us the teacher to begin with. And the whole idea was to try to get through life there with a sort of a minimum of education. Right, be taught to write your name, the alphabet, and etc. And you knew that there was always one kid in each class, one kid whose father was maybe a civil servant, or at least they could look forward to a brighter future. And that kid, whoever she was not popular to any degree at all. They had a future, the rest of the kids did. And it was reflected very much at Christmas time, because the mothers had to try to scrape the money together or borrow the money if possible, to try to give the kids a decent Christmas. A few decorations on the wall or on the window, maybe a new pair of shoes for one kid, or a new shirt or something, and a small toy. Each child would maybe be lucky enough to get a small toy, which was pretty new. And the boys set about, of course, testing it by breaking it within the first couple of days. But the girls generally wound up with a doll or a new dress, if they were old enough, a new dress or a new sweater or something there. But it is sad in a way to compare. Someone said comparisons are odious, and when I sort of tend to look back quite a bit there to how people got through life with so little compared with people who have a lot. And the excuse me, people will always sneer. It is it astonished me that people could get by with so little. To get a bit personal about it, I was talking yesterday to a person living in Dublin, outside of Dublin in Ireland, and I sort of was astonished by the fact that coming out, a wet-nosed kid coming out of the back streets of the Falls Road of Belfast, should be talking to him from a suburb of Westchester, the county of Westchester, the town of Eastchester. And I would be, when I reflected upon the 60 or 70 years that have passed since then, certainly 70 years, I could look back and wonder how I remembered so clearly what the Christmases and the school days were like back when I was that age, because it left a bigger impression on me, I think, than maybe the Second World War or the Blitz in England, and that I can remember so many things about it. And to go from one extreme to the other, to have a car sitting in a garage, to sit down in front of a TV set and enjoy a glass of wine. This was not the sort of life that a kid from Belfast ever contemplated to any degree. But someone mentioned the fact that I had a certain philosophy of life which perhaps they admired. And I said it was because the lower you start in circumstances, the more you appreciate how you advance through life. And you, I think, have a greater sense of compassion, which I think I do have, for the people that seem to be without. And each year, because of that, I try to contribute as much as I can to the Salvation Army. Because in my later years in the armed forces, the Salvation Army were the ones that did most to alleviate the burden of being in the armed services. To be in the Western Desert, to be in the middle of nowhere, to be 20 or 30 miles from the nearest highway and find a Salvation Army truck manned by a little old man and his wife, pulling up in the middle of nowhere with some of the necessities of life, like toothpaste or soap or even towel, anything at all that we needed or so. But nothing in the way of booze, unfortunately, but the necessities. And I always had a great appreciation, I've always had a great appreciation of the Salvation Army, which also led back to the civilian life too, to the Depression years, because an awful lot of people depended upon the Salvation Army, as illustrated by George Bernard Shaw in the Major Barbara play. But the getting through life has left me with a greater appreciation than I think most people have who have survived.